The laughter came first, soft, confident, almost careless. A man in an expensive suit leaned back in his chair, smiling as he watched his wife walk into the courtroom alone. No legal team, no entourage. Just a worn briefcase and a calm expression that didn't match the moment. What he didn't know, what no one in that room realized, was that this case had already turned against him. And by the time the judge finished reading the final document, the man who laughed would be the one begging for silence. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Why would a woman choose to represent herself against 3 seasoned attorneys? What made her husband so certain this case was already won? And what truth was hidden inside that quiet briefcase, waiting for the right moment to be revealed? Because this was never just a divorce. This was the unraveling of a carefully constructed lie. A lie that had lived comfortably for years, protected by assumption and arrogance. A lie that depended entirely on one woman staying silent. But silence, as it turns out, doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it means someone is listening, watching, remembering. And when the time comes, that silence transforms into something far more powerful than words ever could. Her name was Andrea Hayes. She was 41 years old when she walked into that courtroom, though she looked older, not from age, but from exhaustion, from carrying weight no one else could see. Andrea had been married to Kenneth Hayes for 18 years. 18 years of building a life, raising 2 children, managing a household, and supporting a man who believed his success was entirely his own. She wasn't weak, she was loyal, and there's a difference the world often forgets. When they met, Kenneth was ambitious but unpolished. He worked in commercial real estate, chasing deals that never quite closed, pitching ideas that never quite landed. He had potential, people said, but potential doesn't pay bills. Andrea did. She worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized construction firm, managing timelines, budgets, contractors. She was good at details, good at seeing what others missed, good at making sure things didn't fall apart. Kenneth loved that about her. At first. He'd come home frustrated from failed meetings, and Andrea would listen. She'd ask the right questions. She'd find the gaps in his proposals, she'd suggest adjustments he hadn't considered, and slowly Kenneth's deals started closing. His reputation grew, his income tripled, then quadrupled. Within 5 years, he'd launched his own development company. Within 10, he was managing multi-million-dollar projects across 3 states. And Andrea, she stayed home, not because Kenneth demanded it, but because someone needed to. Their daughter, Lily, was 6 when Kenneth's business took off. Their son, Marcus, was 4. Childcare cost more than it was worth, and Andrea's job, while stable, couldn't compete with Kenneth's earning potential. So she made the choice that millions of women make. She stepped back. She became the foundation so he could build higher. She managed the finances, paid the bills, coordinated the contractors when they renovated their home, kept the books for Kenneth's company in the early years when he couldn't afford a full-time accountant. She wasn't on the payroll, wasn't listed as a partner. But she was there, in the spreadsheets, in the late-night strategy sessions, in the decisions that shaped everything Kenneth built. The same silence he mistook for submission was the silence of someone paying attention. Kenneth didn't notice when things shifted. Or maybe he did, and he simply stopped caring. Success changed him. The man who used to ask Andrea's opinion started making decisions without her. The man who used to come home and talk about his day started coming home later and later with less and less to say. The man who used to look at her like she mattered started looking past her entirely. By their 15th anniversary, Kenneth had stopped pretending. He didn't kiss her goodbye in the mornings, didn't ask about her day, didn't acknowledge her presence unless he needed something. Andrea told herself it was temporary, that success was stressful, that once things settled, they'd reconnect. But things never settled. Kenneth's business kept growing. His confidence became arrogance, his ambition became entitlement, and Andrea became invisible. She didn't realize how invisible until the night she found the texts. It was a Tuesday. Kenneth had left his phone on the kitchen counter, which was unusual. He was always careful with his phone, always had it in his pocket, face down, password protected. But that night, he'd been drinking, celebrating a deal. He'd stumbled upstairs to bed, leaving the phone behind. Andrea wasn't the type to snoop. She'd never felt the need. But something about the way he'd been acting lately, the distance, the secrecy, the late nights, made her pick it up. The phone was unlocked. The messages were right there. Months of them. Another woman, younger. An associate at his company named Jessica. The messages were explicit, detailed, casual in a way that suggested this wasn't new, wasn't a mistake, wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a relationship, a life Kenneth was building parallel to the one he shared with Andrea. And the worst part? The messages mocked her. Jessica had written, "Does she even notice you're gone?" Kenneth had replied, "She doesn't notice anything. She's too busy playing housewife." Andrea set the phone down carefully. She didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't wake him. She just walked into the home office, opened the filing cabinet, and started pulling documents, bank statements, tax returns, business filings, property deeds. She'd organized all of it over the years, kept everything meticulously documented. She spread the papers across the desk and began reading, not with anger, with focus. That night, while he slept peacefully, she opened a folder she hadn't touched in years and realized something he never had. Kenneth's business wasn't just his. Legally, structurally, financially, it was half hers. He'd forgotten. Or maybe he'd never understood. When he'd launched the company, Andrea had co-signed everything. The loans, the leases, the incorporation documents. Kenneth had needed her credit, her signature, her financial backing to get started, and, because she'd trusted him, she'd signed. He'd promised they were partners, that this was their future, their family's security. And then he'd simply stopped mentioning it, stopped including her, stopped acknowledging her role. But the documents didn't forget. The state didn't forget. And now, sitting in that office at 2 a.m, Andrea didn't forget either. 3 weeks later, Kenneth filed for divorce. He did it casually, almost lazily, handed her the papers over breakfast like he was passing the salt. "I think we both know this hasn't been working," he said. "I've already talked to my lawyer. This should be straightforward. You keep the house, I keep the business. We split the savings. The kids stay with you primarily. I'll cover support." Andrea looked at the papers, looked at him. "You've already decided all this?" "It's fair," Kenneth said. "You haven't worked in years. You're not entitled to the business. That's mine." "Ours?" Andrea said quietly. Kenneth frowned. "What?" "You said the business is mine. It's ours." Kenneth laughed, actually laughed. "Andrea, you haven't been involved in that company in over a decade. You're not on the payroll. You don't have equity. You're not entitled to anything beyond standard spousal support." "We'll see," Andrea said. And that was all she said. Kenneth didn't take her seriously. Why would he? He had 3 lawyers, a legal team that specialized in high-asset divorces, attorneys who knew every loophole, every strategy, every way to protect wealth from ex-spouses. Andrea had none of that. She'd gone to one consultation with a family lawyer, a kind woman named Patricia, who'd listened carefully and then said, "Andrea, I'll be honest. Cases like this are expensive. If you're representing yourself, you're at a significant disadvantage. His team will bury you in paperwork. They'll delay, they'll intimidate. Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Andrea had nodded. "I don't have a choice. I can't afford what he can afford." Patricia had sighed. "Then document everything, every conversation, every financial record, every inconsistency, and don't let them rattle you." Andrea had thanked her and left. She didn't hire an attorney. She couldn't afford one who could match Kenneth's team. And she didn't need one because she had something better. She had the truth. The first court date was set for early April. Kenneth arrived with his legal team. 3 attorneys in tailored suits, leather briefcases, confident strides. They moved through the courthouse like they owned it. Kenneth was relaxed, smiling. He greeted people he knew, shook hands, laughed at someone's joke. This was a formality to him, an inconvenience. Andrea arrived alone. She wore a simple navy dress, carried a worn leather briefcase that had belonged to her father. She looked small, nervous, exactly what Kenneth expected. His lead attorney, a man named Griffith, leaned over and whispered something to Kenneth. They both smiled. Andrea saw it. She didn't react, just walked to her table, set down her briefcase and waited. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The hearing began. Griffith spoke first. He was polished, articulate. He laid out Kenneth's position clearly. The marriage had been over for years. Kenneth had built a successful business through his own effort and expertise. Andrea had been a supportive spouse, but she had no legal claim to the company. She was entitled to spousal support, yes, a fair division of marital assets, certainly, but the business was separate property, protected, untouchable. Griffith submitted financial statements, business valuations, testimony from Kenneth's accountant confirming that Andrea had no formal role in the company, no salary, no title, no equity. The judge listened, took notes, then turned to Andrea. "Mrs. Hayes, do you have representation?" "No, Your Honor, I'm representing myself." Murmurs in the courtroom. Griffith didn't hide his smile. "Do you understand the disadvantage that puts you at?" the judge asked. "I do, Your Honor." "And you're proceeding anyway?" "Yes." The judge sighed. "Very well. Do you have a response to Mr. Hayes's petition?" Andrea stood, opened her briefcase, pulled out a single folder. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that contradicts Mr. Hayes' claim that the business is separate property." Griffith stood immediately. "Objection. We were not provided any evidence in discovery." "I filed everything properly," Andrea said calmly. "It's all in the record." The judge checked, nodded. "She's right. Continue, Mrs. Hayes." Andrea handed copies to the judge and to Griffith's table. Kenneth glanced at the papers. His smile faded. The documents were incorporation filings from 18 years ago, when Kenneth had first launched Hayes Development Group. Andrea's name was on every page: co-founder, co-signer on the business loans, joint applicant on the commercial lease. Her credit had backed the initial line of credit. Her signature had guaranteed the startup capital. Kenneth had forgotten, or assumed. It didn't matter, but it did. "Your Honor," Andrea said, "when my husband started his company, I wasn't just supportive, I was foundational. He couldn't have launched without my financial backing. According to these documents, I'm legally listed as a co-founder. I never relinquished that role. I was never bought out. I simply stepped back to raise our children while he grew the business. But stepping back doesn't mean I surrendered ownership." The courtroom was silent. Griffith was flipping through the documents, his confidence evaporating. Kenneth was staring at Andrea like he'd never seen her before. Mr. Griffith, the judge said, were you aware of these documents? No, Your Honor, this is the first I'm seeing them. Mr. Hayes, the judge turned to Kenneth. Were you aware your wife was listed as a co-founder? Kenneth hesitated. That was a long time ago, a formality. She wasn't actually involved. But she was legally involved, the judge interrupted. Legally obligated, legally liable. If the business had failed, she would have been responsible for the debts, correct? Kenneth didn't answer. Mr. Hayes? Yes, Kenneth said quietly. Then legally, the judge said, she's entitled to an ownership stake. Griffith tried to recover. He argued that Andrea had abandoned her role, that years of non-participation constituted forfeiture, that Kenneth had been the sole operator, the sole decision-maker, the sole reason for the company's success. Andrea waited. Let him finish. Then she stood again. Your Honor, may I submit additional evidence? The judge nodded. Andrea pulled out another folder. This one was thicker. These are emails spanning 15 years between myself and my husband. In them, you'll see that I regularly provided financial advice, reviewed contracts, identified cost-saving measures, connected him with contractors and vendors. I wasn't on the payroll, but I was consulted on every major decision for the first decade of the business. She handed copies to the judge, to Griffith, to Kenneth. Your Honor, Andrea continued, I also have bank records showing that marital funds were used to cover business expenses during lean years. My income from my job was used to float the business when cash flow was tight. I can provide tax returns showing joint filing, where business losses were offset against my income. This company didn't just benefit from my initial backing. It survived because of my continued financial contribution. Griffith was pale now. Kenneth was gripping the edge of the table. The judge read through the emails, the bank statements, the tax returns. Mrs. Hayes, the judge said slowly, why didn't you include yourself on the payroll? Why didn't you formalize your role? Because I trusted my husband, Andrea said simply. I believed we were building this together. I didn't think I needed a title or a salary to prove my contribution. I thought partnership was understood. The judge looked at Kenneth. Mr. Hayes, did you ever compensate your wife for her contributions? She was my wife. We shared everything. You shared a home. You shared children. But did you share ownership of the business you built together? Kenneth didn't answer. I'll take that as a no, the judge said. She closed the folder. We'll adjourn for today. I want both parties to submit revised financial disclosures. Mr. Griffith, I strongly suggest you and your client reconsider your position. Mrs. Hayes has made a compelling argument that this business is not separate property. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. The gavel fell. Kenneth stood frozen. His lawyers were already whispering frantically, shuffling papers, avoiding eye contact. Andrea closed her briefcase, walked out of the courtroom, alone, calm, exactly as she'd entered. The 2 weeks between hearings were the longest of Andrea's life, not because she was afraid, but because Kenneth was finally paying attention. He called, texted, showed up at the house. At first, he tried charm. Andrea, this is getting out of hand. We don't need to fight like this. Let's just settle. I'll be fair. When charm didn't work, he tried guilt. Think about the kids. Do you really want them seeing their parents destroy each other in court? When guilt didn't work, he tried intimidation. You're embarrassing yourself. You don't understand business. You don't understand law. You're going to lose everything. Andrea didn't engage. She'd learned long ago that arguing with Kenneth was pointless. He didn't listen. He waited for his turn to talk. So she stopped talking. She focused on preparation. She reviewed every document, every email, every transaction. She built timelines, cross-referenced dates, found inconsistencies in Kenneth's financial disclosures. She discovered something else too. Something Kenneth's lawyers had missed, or hoped she'd miss. 3 years ago, Kenneth had transferred significant assets out of the business. Real estate holdings, investment accounts. He'd moved them into a separate LLC, an LLC that wasn't disclosed in the divorce filings. It was legal maneuvering, the kind wealthy people do to protect assets, but it was also hiding wealth, and hiding wealth in a divorce is fraud. Andrea documented everything. She didn't confront Kenneth, didn't tip her hand. She just added it to her folder and waited. The night before the second hearing, Andrea's daughter Lily came into her room. Lily was 14 now, old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to have opinions. "Mum?" "Yeah, sweetie? Are you going to be okay?" Andrea looked at her daughter, saw worry in her eyes, worry that shouldn't be there. "I'm going to be fine. Dad says you're trying to take everything from him." Andrea took a breath. "I'm not trying to take anything. Trying to keep what's mine. He says you're being greedy." "Do you think I'm being greedy?" Lily was quiet for a moment. "I think you're being brave." Andrea hugged her daughter. "Thank you, baby. That means everything." The second hearing was different. Kenneth wasn't smiling anymore. His legal team looked tense, prepared for battle. The judge entered. "Mrs. Hayes, do you have anything further to submit?" "Yes, Your Honor." Andrea stood, pulled out yet another folder. This one made Kenneth's face go white. "Your Honor, I've discovered that 3 years ago my husband transferred several high-value assets out of Hayes Development Group and into a separate entity called KH Holdings LLC. These assets were not disclosed in his initial financial statements. I believe this constitutes an attempt to hide marital property." She handed the documents to the judge, to Griffith. Kenneth leaned over to his lawyer, whispered something urgent. Griffith stood. "Your Honor, KH Holdings is a separate business entity. It has nothing to do with this divorce." "Then why wasn't it disclosed?" the judge asked. It's not technically part of the marital estate." "But it was funded with marital assets," Andrea said. "Assets from Hayes Development, which, as we've established, is partially mine." The judge reviewed the documents. "Mr. Griffith, this looks like asset concealment." "It's asset protection, Your Honor. Standard business practice." "Standard practice would have been to disclose it," the judge said sharply. "Mr. Hayes, did you intentionally fail to disclose this LLC?" Kenneth hesitated. "I didn't think it was relevant." "You didn't think assets worth millions of dollars were relevant to your divorce?" Silence. The judge set down the papers. "I'm going to order a full forensic accounting of all business entities connected to Mr. Hayes, and I'm going to appoint a special master to ensure full disclosure. If I find that assets were deliberately hidden, there will be consequences." Kenneth looked like he might be sick. Griffith was furiously taking notes. Andrea sat calmly. The judge turned to her. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm impressed by your thoroughness, but I have to ask, why represent yourself? Why not hire an attorney to handle this?" Andrea thought carefully. "Your Honor, I couldn't afford an attorney who could match my husband's team. And honestly, I didn't think I needed one. I know this business. I know these finances." "But I know what's true. I thought that might be enough." The judge nodded slowly. "It's more than enough. We'll reconvene once the forensic accounting is complete." Court adjourned. The gavel fell. Kenneth didn't move. His lawyers were packing up quickly, avoiding eye contact. Andrea closed her briefcase, walked past Kenneth without looking at him. As she reached the door, she heard him call her name. "Andrea." She stopped, turned. "You're really going to do this?" Kenneth said. It wasn't a question. "I already did," Andrea replied, and she left. The forensic accounting took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of an independent investigator combing through every transaction, every transfer, every entity connected to Kenneth Hayes. What they found was worse than Andrea had suspected. Kenneth hadn't just hidden assets. He'd been systematically moving money out of the business for years, not for business purposes, for personal use, luxury purchases, trips with Jessica, a condo he'd bought under the LLC for their meetings. He'd been funneling marital assets into a secret life, and he'd been doing it so slowly, so carefully, that he thought no one would notice. But Andrea had noticed, because Andrea paid attention. The final hearing was in late June. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread about the case. A woman representing herself against a millionaire. People wanted to see how it ended. Kenneth arrived with his full legal team, but the confidence was gone. They looked like soldiers marching into a battle they knew they'd already lost. Andrea arrived alone. Same briefcase, same calm expression. The judge entered. "We're here for final arguments and ruling in the matter of Hayes versus Hayes. I've reviewed the forensic report, and I have to say, Mr. Hayes, I'm deeply troubled." Kenneth's lawyer tried to interrupt. The judge held up her hand. "Mr. Griffith, your client has engaged in financial misconduct. He concealed assets. He misrepresented the value of his business. He transferred marital property into hidden entities. This is not a grey area. This is fraud." Kenneth was gripping the table. The judge continued. "Mrs. Hayes, on the other hand, has demonstrated extraordinary diligence. She uncovered what a team of attorneys missed. She presented clear, documented evidence. She has proven beyond any doubt that she is entitled to a significant ownership stake in Hayes Development Group and all related entities." The judge looked at Kenneth. "Mr. Hayes, I'm awarding Mrs. Hayes 50% ownership of Hayes Development Group, KH Holdings LLC, and all subsidiary entities. Additionally, I'm awarding her 70% of all marital assets. As a penalty for your attempted concealment, you will also be responsible for all court costs and Mrs. Hayes's expenses incurred during this process." The courtroom erupted. Kenneth's face went red. He started to stand. His lawyer pulled him back down. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I'm ordering that Mrs. Hayes be granted full decision-making authority over the business until a formal operating agreement can be established. If you cannot work together, Mr. Hayes, you'll need to buy her out at fair market value, or she can buy you out, but you no longer have unilateral control." She looked at Andrea. "Mrs. Hayes, do you have anything you'd like to say?" Andrea stood. "Just thank you, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Good luck. You've earned this." The gavel fell. Final. Absolute. Kenneth sat frozen. His lawyers were already whispering about appeals, about negotiations, about damage control. Andrea packed her briefcase. People were congratulating her as she walked out. Strangers, other attorneys, court staff who'd watched the whole thing unfold. Outside, Andrea sat on a bench. She didn't cry, didn't celebrate, she just breathed. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Her phone buzzed, a text from Lily. "Mum, did you win?" Andrea smiled, typed back, "Yes, baby, we won." 3 months later, Kenneth agreed to a buyout. He didn't have a choice. The business couldn't function with 2 hostile owners, and Andrea had made it clear she wasn't going anywhere. The settlement was substantial, more than Andrea had ever imagined, enough to secure her future, her children's future, enough to start over, not as someone's wife, as herself. Kenneth sold his share of the company and moved out of state. Last Andrea heard, he and Jessica had broken up. Turns out relationships built on betrayal don't last long when the money runs out. Andrea didn't gloat, didn't post about it on social media, didn't tell her story to anyone who didn't need to know. She just moved forward. She enrolled in a business management program at the local university, something she'd always wanted to do but never had time for. She reconnected with old friends, traveled with her kids, planted a garden, learned to play the guitar. Small things, quiet things. Things that made her feel like herself again. One afternoon, about a year after the divorce was finalized, Andrea ran into Patricia, the family lawyer who'd advised her at the beginning. They were at a bookstore. Patricia recognized her immediately. "Andrea, how are you?" "I'm good, really good. I heard about your case. Everyone in the legal community is talking about it. You're a legend." Andrea laughed. "I don't know about that. You represented yourself and won against one of the best divorce firms in the state. That's unheard of." Andrea shrugged. "I just told the truth." Patricia smiled. "That's the thing about the truth. When you have it, you don't need much else." They talked for a while. Patricia mentioned she'd started a non-profit helping women navigate divorce without expensive legal representation. She asked if Andrea would consider speaking at an event, sharing her story. Andrea thought about it. "What would I even say?" "Tell them what you told me that day in my office, that you didn't have a choice. And then tell them what you did anyway." Andrea did speak at that event. It was small, maybe 30 women in a community center conference room. Some were recently divorced, some were considering it. All of them looked tired, scared, overwhelmed. Andrea stood at the front of the room with no notes, no script, just her story. She told them about the 18 years, about the silence, about the night she found the texts, about the moment she realized she had a choice. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you divorce is easy," Andrea said. "It's not. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever do. And representing yourself makes it even harder. But here's what I learned. You don't need to be louder than the other side. You don't need to be richer. You don't need to be smarter. You just need to be right. And you need to be thorough." She talked about documentation, about keeping records, about understanding your finances, even when someone else is managing them. "I didn't wake up one day and suddenly understand business law," Andrea said. "I just paid attention. I asked questions. I kept copies of everything. And when the time came, I used what I knew." A woman in the back raised her hand. "But weren't you scared, walking into court alone?" "Terrified," Andrea admitted, "every single time. But I was more scared of the alternative, of letting someone take what I'd helped build, of teaching my kids that you just accept injustice because fighting is hard." She paused. "Fear doesn't go away. You just decide it doesn't get to make your decisions." Another woman asked, "What if you'd lost?" "Then I'd lost," Andrea said. "But at least I would have fought. At least I would have tried. And honestly, I think that was what scared my ex-husband most. Not that I might win, but that I refused to just go away quietly." The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then everyone. Andrea wasn't used to applause. It made her uncomfortable. But she understood what it meant. It wasn't for her. It was for them, for the possibility that maybe they could do it too. After the event, women came up to her, asked questions, shared their stories. One woman, maybe 25, said, "I've been married 2 years. My husband controls everything, the money, the accounts, everything. I don't even know what we have." "Start learning," Andrea said gently. "You don't have to be secretive about it. Just start asking questions. Ask to see the bank statements. Ask about investments. Ask to be added to accounts. If he resists, that tells you something. And if he doesn't, you're protecting yourself either way." The woman nodded. "What if it's too late? What if I already don't know anything?" "It's never too late to start paying attention," Andrea said. Over the next year, Andrea became an informal advisor to Patricia's non-profit. She didn't have a law degree, didn't have formal training, but she had experience, and she had empathy. She met with women facing similar situations, helped them organize their documents, taught them how to read financial statements, how to spot red flags, how to protect themselves. She started a blog, nothing fancy, just practical advice. How to access your credit report. What to do if your spouse controls all the money. How to document financial abuse. The blog grew. Women shared it, recommended it, sent Andrea thank you emails that made her cry. One email stayed with her. It was from a woman named Julie. "I found your blog 6 months ago when my husband filed for divorce. He's a lawyer. I'm a teacher. I thought I had no chance. But I followed your advice. I gathered everything. I documented everything. I represented myself. And yesterday the judge ruled in my favor. I got primary custody of my kids and a fair division of assets. I couldn't have done it without your voice telling me it was possible. Thank you for fighting. It gave me permission to fight too." Andrea read that email 3 times. She printed it out, kept it in her desk drawer, because it reminded her why the fight had mattered, not just for her, for everyone who came after. 2 years after her divorce, Andrea did something she'd never imagined. She went back to school, got her MBA, focused on business management and finance. She was older than most of her classmates, didn't care. She graduated with honors, used her settlement money to start her own consulting firm. She helped small businesses with financial planning, with operations, with the same details she'd managed for Kenneth's company, except now she was getting paid for it, getting credit for it, and building something that was entirely hers. Her kids thrived. Lily went to college, studied law, said she wanted to help people the way her mum had helped herself. Marcus, now 17, was quieter, but he told Andrea once, "I'm proud of you, Mum, for not letting Dad get away with it." "I didn't do it for revenge," Andrea said. "I know," Marcus replied. "You did it because it was right. That's even better." Andrea thought about that conversation often, about what her kids had learned from watching her fight. Not how to be vindictive, not how to be bitter, but how to stand up for yourself when no one else will, how to trust your own knowledge, your own worth, how to refuse to be erased. 3 years after the divorce, Andrea got an unexpected call. It was Griffith, Kenneth's former lead attorney. "Mrs. Hayes, this is David Griffith. I represented your ex-husband during your divorce." "I remember," Andrea said carefully. "I'm calling because I wanted to apologize." Andrea was silent, surprised. "I underestimated you," Griffith continued. "Completely. I assumed you'd be overwhelmed, easy to intimidate. I was wrong. And more than that, I was unprofessional. You deserved better. Your ex-husband deserved to lose. And I wanted you to know that your case changed how I approach my work." "How so?" Andrea asked. "I don't assume anymore. I don't dismiss people who represent themselves. And I'm much more careful about taking clients who aren't being honest with me. What your ex-husband did was fraud. I should have caught it. You did. That's on me." "Thank you for saying that," Andrea said. "For what it's worth," Griffith added, "you'd make a hell of an attorney." Andrea smiled. "I'm good where I am, but I appreciate that." They talked for a few more minutes. It was strange, surreal, but also healing in a way Andrea hadn't expected. When she hung up, she felt lighter, like something she'd been carrying without realizing it had finally been set down. 5 years after the divorce, Andrea was invited to speak at a legal conference, not as a lawyer, as a case study. Her story had become something of a legend in family law circles. The woman who represented herself and won against all odds. She stood in front of 200 attorneys and told them the same thing she'd told those women in the community center. You don't need to be louder, you just need to be right. Afterward, a young attorney approached her. Ms. Hayes, I have a client. She's in a similar situation. Husband with money, complicated finances. She wants to represent herself. Should I encourage that? Andrea thought carefully. Encourage her to understand her case, to know her finances, to document everything, and then tell her the truth. That it's going to be hard, that she's going to feel overwhelmed, but that if she's thorough, if she's honest, if she's persistent, she has a chance. Not a guarantee, but a chance. And sometimes that's enough. The attorney nodded. Thank you. One more thing, Andrea said. Tell her she's not alone, even when she's sitting at that table by herself. She's not alone. There are women who've done this before, who've survived, who've won, and if they can do it, so can she. What would you have done in Andrea's position? Would you have fought? Or would you have walked away? And if you're in a relationship right now, ask yourself this. Do you know your finances? Do you know what you own? Do you know what you're entitled to? Because Andrea's story teaches us something critical, something every person in a partnership needs to understand. Financial knowledge isn't just practical. It's protection. Here's what you need to do today. Right now, whether you're married, in a relationship, or single. First, know what you own. If you're married, you should have access to all financial accounts, bank statements, investment accounts, retirement funds, property deeds. If you don't, ask for them. If your partner refuses, that's a red flag. Second, understand your credit. Get your free credit report from annualcreditreport.com. Make sure there are no accounts you don't recognize. Make sure your credit isn't being used without your knowledge. Third, keep your own records. Even if your partner manages the finances, keep copies of tax returns. Keep bank statements. Keep receipts for major purchases. Store them somewhere safe. Somewhere only you can access. Fourth, know your rights. Every state has different laws about marital property. Community property states split everything 50-50. Equitable distribution states divide fairly but not necessarily equally. Know which one you live in, know what you're entitled to. Fifth, don't sign anything you don't understand. Andrea signed documents when Kenneth started his business, but she read them first. She understood what she was signing. If your partner asks you to sign legal documents, loan applications, business filings, read every word, ask questions. If you don't understand something, consult someone who does. Never sign blindly, even if you trust the person asking. Sixth, maintain your own financial identity. Keep at least one account in your name only, even if it's small. Even if it's just a savings account with $100, have something that's yours, that you control, that no one else can freeze or empty without your knowledge. And finally, document everything. If you're in a marriage that's struggling, if you suspect infidelity or financial dishonesty, start keeping records, print bank statements, screenshot texts if necessary. Keep a journal of conversations, note dates, times, what was said. This isn't about being paranoid, it's about being prepared. Because here's the truth Andrea learned the hard way. When a relationship ends, people don't always behave the way you expect. Someone who seemed reasonable can become vindictive. Someone you trusted completely can hide assets. Someone who promised partnership can claim sole ownership. You hope it never happens, but if it does, you need to be ready. Not because you're looking for a fight, but because you deserve to protect what you helped build. Now let's talk about what Andrea's case teaches us legally, because there are specific, practical lessons here that could save your financial future. First, co-signing makes you equally responsible. When Andrea co-signed those initial business documents, she became legally liable for the business's debts, but she also became legally entitled to its assets. Kenneth couldn't just erase her contribution by removing her from daily operations. The law doesn't work that way. If you help start a business, If you co-sign loans, if you guarantee credit, you have rights. Document your involvement from the beginning. Second, marital funds used for business create claims. Andrea's income supported the business during lean years. That created what's called commingling of assets. Even if a business is owned by one spouse, if marital money funded it, the other spouse may have a claim. This is why forensic accountants exist. They trace money, they follow paper trails, they find contributions that aren't obvious. If you're going through a divorce and your spouse owns a business, insist on forensic accounting. Third, hiding assets is fraud. Kenneth thought he was being clever by moving assets into a separate LLC, but he crossed a legal line. Transferring property to avoid division in divorce is illegal. Courts take it seriously, and when they find it, they penalize it severely. That's why Andrea was awarded 70% of marital assets instead of 50%. The judge was punishing Kenneth's deception. If you suspect your spouse is hiding money, tell your attorney immediately. Or if you're representing yourself, document everything suspicious and present it to the judge. Fourth, you have a right to discovery. Discovery is the legal process where both sides exchange information. Financial records, business documents, tax returns. If one side refuses to provide required documents, the court can compel them, or sanction them, or draw negative inferences against them. Andrea used discovery to get the documents Kenneth didn't want to share. She filed proper requests, she followed procedures, and when his team tried to bury her in paperwork, she worked through it methodically. You can do the same. Most courts have self-help resources. Legal aid societies offer guidance. You don't need a law degree. You need patience and attention to detail. Fifth, judges respect preparation. Andrea impressed the judge not because she was a legal expert, but because she was thorough. She had evidence for every claim. She had documents to back up every statement. She was organized, clear, credible. When you represent yourself, that's your advantage, and you know your case better than any attorney ever could. You lived it. Use that. Be the expert on your own life. Sixth, appeals are expensive and rarely successful. Kenneth's attorneys probably advised him to appeal, but appeals aren't retrials, they're reviews of legal errors, and Andrea hadn't made legal errors. She'd followed procedure, presented admissible evidence, made legal arguments. There was nothing to appeal. That's another lesson. If you're representing yourself, follow the rules. File on time, use proper forms, be respectful to the judge. Dot every I, cross every T. Don't give the other side ammunition for appeal. And finally, the most important lesson. Justice doesn't require a law degree. It requires truth and persistence. Andrea won because she was right, because she had proof, because she refused to give up, not because she was smarter or richer or more powerful, but because she knew what was true and she made sure the court knew it too. That's available to anyone. That power, the power of truth, properly documented and clearly presented, doesn't belong only to people who can afford expensive lawyers. It belongs to anyone willing to do the work. So here's what I want you to take from Andrea's story. If you're in a marriage or partnership, protect yourself now, not because you expect betrayal, but because protection is always easier before you need it. Know your finances, keep records, maintain independence, stay informed, and if the worst happens, know that you have options, you have rights, you have the ability to fight for what's yours. You don't need to be a lawyer, you don't need to be wealthy, you don't need to be fearless. You just need to be thorough, honest, persistent. Andrea sat at that courtroom table alone, but she wasn't powerless because she'd spent years paying attention, keeping records, understanding the foundation beneath the life she'd helped build. And when it mattered, that knowledge became her greatest weapon. Not against her husband, against injustice, against the assumption that silence means surrender. Against the idea that some people deserve protection while others deserve to be erased. What about you? Are you paying attention? Do you know what you own? What you've contributed? What you're entitled to? If something happened tomorrow, if you came home to divorce papers on the table, would you know where to start? Would you know what documents to gather? Would you know your rights? Or would you be starting from zero, overwhelmed, hoping someone else will save you? Because here's the hardest truth. No one is coming to save you. Not a lawyer, not a judge, not even well-meaning friends. You have to save yourself. And you do that by being prepared, by being informed, by refusing to be invisible in your own financial life. Andrea learned that lesson the hard way, but you don't have to. You can learn it right now, today, this moment. You can check your credit report, you can ask to see bank statements, you can make copies of important documents, you can open an account in your own name, you can start protecting yourself, not because you expect betrayal, but because protection is an act of self-love, an act of self-respect, an act of acknowledging that you matter, that your contributions matter, that your future matters. So do it. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. And if you're watching this because you're already in the middle of a divorce, already facing someone with more money and more lawyers, already feeling overwhelmed and outmatched, hear this. You can still win. It won't be easy. It will take everything you have, but if your case is based on truth, if you have documentation, if you're willing to do the work, you have a chance. Andrea proved that. And she's not superhuman. She's just a woman who refused to disappear, who refused to accept that 18 years of contribution could be erased by expensive suits and legal jargon, who showed up, told the truth, and let the evidence speak. You can do the same. And when you do, when you walk out of that courtroom having protected what's yours, you won't just be winning a case. You'll be teaching everyone watching that silence doesn't mean surrender. That preparation is power. That justice doesn't require a law degree. Just truth, just persistence, just the refusal to let someone else write the ending of your story. So tell us, what's the most important financial lesson you've learned? What advice would you give someone facing a situation like Andrea's? Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? Share your story in the comments, because every story shared is permission for someone else to fight. Every victory documented is proof that it's possible. And every person who stands up for themselves makes it easier for the next person to do the same. Thank you for watching. If this story helped you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's feeling trapped, someone who thinks they're powerless, someone who needs to know that one woman with a briefcase and the truth can defeat an army of lawyers with nothing but lies. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss stories like this, because we're not done. There are more Kennets out there and more Andreas, and the Andreas need to know they're not alone. We'll see you in the next one. Stay informed, stay prepared. And remember, justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it walks in calmly, sets down a briefcase, and lets the truth speak for itself.